edition of The Boogeyman. Today we're going to do a double bill talking about the movie The Gallows and also the movie Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension. Now the thing about both of these movies is they have a disturbing tendency within modern horror movies to be very not scary. In terms of the movie The Gallows, the thing that makes it not scary, I feel, is like the filmmakers do not have enough animosity towards their audience. They're very kind of childish in the tropes that they use. They have a couple of teenagers that get spooked by a ghost in their school as they sneak into it in the middle of the night to try to sabotage a set. Because one of the teenagers in question is actually quite shy and he sucks at acting really bad. And he doesn't want to disappoint his crush, who is one of the people organizing a play that is for some reason based on a play where somebody actually accidentally got killed. Now the thing that's interesting about The Gallows is that it never explains exactly why they're coming back to this play. They just simply do. It seems to me that a play where somebody was accidentally killed would be a little bit of a sensitive material. They never address this sensitivity in the movie. They just simply say, well, we're having it. Yeah. So immediately it's a little bit difficult to get attached to the premise. This also doesn't get helped by the fact that none of these teenagers are really that interesting. They play with the common tropes. You know, you have the geek, the jock, the geek jock, who's kind of a hybrid character, but they're all very stereotypical characters, and that makes them very difficult to attach to. They don't have very complex lives. They're very simplistic, and they're not necessarily detestable, but they're just not very deep. All they do is really goof around, and then they get into this environment where there happens to be a ghost, and the ghost appears, and I just spoiled the entire movie for you, just so you know. That's the entire movie. Now, the scares in The Gallows are very hit and miss, and for the most part they miss. You have things like things moving in the background that the characters don't notice, things shifting around a little bit, and you have a ghost who's actually interesting visually, but that appears very randomly, very sporadically, to kill off these teenagers. And when he does actually encounter these teenagers, he basically just randomly kills them. And that's one of the things I don't like about horror movies, is when you have a supernatural creature who has the capacity to basically do whatever he wants, and for some reason he waits and toys with his prey, and it becomes this really unbelievable cat and mouse game. Now, if I had the chance to be a Fallout character and had like a mini nuke and then had my enemy in front of me, I wouldn't really hesitate to... Maybe that makes me sociopathic, I don't know. But if I hated somebody enough to actually want to see them dead, like this ghost for some reason wants these teenagers dead, and had the capacity, the power in his hands like that fat boy from Fallout, I don't see why he wouldn't just use it right away. And it becomes this really difficult game of cat and mouse to get behind, because usually with a game of cat and mouse, the killer or the antagonist does not have the power to address his enemy directly, and that's why he plays cat and mouse. Or in some cases, like in I Saw the Devil, the character just simply doesn't want to because he wants his prey to suffer. And maybe that's the case with The Gallows, but I don't really feel the motivation there. The story that does explain why the ghost is after the teenagers doesn't give the apparition enough motivation to really play this cat and mouse game in the first place. It's just really pure hatred. He just wants these teenagers dead because they're tied to an event that caused him to die. That's it. So that's not really motivation to make these characters suffer. So the entire movie's quite unmotivated. But again, getting back to this idea of the unscary horror, the thing that makes it really disappointing is that the filmmakers really just aren't well versed in the topic of torturing others and the topic of why one might want to torture. There's no sense of true antagonism in The Gallows. It's really censored. It feels like a bunch of kids got together and said, you know what would be spooky? Which might be okay for children. This movie might be okay for children. Which gets me back to Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension. One of the things I've heard to defend the Paranormal Activity movies, because none of them are terribly scary, is that maybe this is okay because it's for families. So they have the kid there, and the adults can enjoy it. I think that's a little disingenuous when it comes to horror, because the thing is, if it can't scare little Billy, it's not going to scare little Billy's dad or mom. And that's the issue with this type of stuff, is that it sets up tropes and is just unwilling to go that extra mile to really just shock the audience and to shake them into submission and to really just kind of spook the hell out of them. It's like a roller coaster that doesn't really have all these dangerous loops and turns and is really just oh yeah. So that's what you have with both the Gallows and Paranormal Activity, the Ghost Dimension. And I feel like I haven't really talked about the second one a little bit, so let me talk about that. In Paranormal Activity, the Ghost Dimension, basically, the tagline of the entire film, in Paranormal Activity, the Ghost Dimension, yes, I bought this piece of crap, the tagline is actually, for the first time, you will see the activity. This is like the 6th film in this series. For the first time, you will see something. God damn it! It took 6 films before they decided, let's actually show you something. That means for the first 5 films or so, the filmmakers have been devoted to not showing you anything. This would be fine if it was a radio show, and then now is the first time it's being played as a movie, but it's not. This is a film. Spectacle is an important aspect of film. And the fact that this is the first time you actually see any activity in a film series called Paranormal Activity is just disappointing. And I cannot defend that. And I'm sorry if you like the Paranormal Activity series, but I think it's actually part of what's wrong with a lot of modern horror. It tries to have such a broad audience. And the thing about horror is that it's at its most scary when it's being transgressive, specifically. And when I say that, I mean it has to break some taboos. It has to have some edge to it. As Clive Barker once said, you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs, and you can't make a horror movie without breaking heads. And I stick to that. If little Timmy is not scared, I am not going to be scared no matter how much you set things up. One of the things I found interesting, though, about Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension, is that it plays the exact same formula that we've seen before, which is a family moves into a house, there's random bumps and things that go bump in the night that are really terribly uninteresting in their own right. And then one of the children, blah, 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 child corruption, blah, blah, blah. This movie plays the exact same trope, except that you actually see the activity. And really that's the only difference in Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension, is that you see the ghost. And that's not enough because the formula itself isn't terribly frightening. There's a few scenes, like there's one scene I can recall where the dad looks under the bed for the monster because the monster can be seen with this special super duper camera, Scooby-Doo camera that he's found. It pans down while the child is sleeping, and then he looks down, and then he comes up and the child's right in his face, which is not necessarily a bad setup, but when I seen it, it was just really disappointing that this was the best kind of spooks that they could come up with. Really. You know, I'm not a big fan of jump scares, but in terms of jump scares, this could have been filmed a lot differently. And a part of the problem is probably that adherence to the Paranormal Activity formula, which is we grab a camera, we never stop filming, and which is fine by its own right, but you have to set up things that match that way of filming. You can be effective in the cinema verite style, and movies like VHS 1 and 2 prove that you can actually have this style, the cinema verite style, and still be spooky as hell. Now, you don't need necessarily high amounts of gore or nudity like the VHS series has, but you have to have something that has a lot of edge. And now, Oren Peli's original Paranormal Activity was interesting because it was very DIY horror. And that was interesting in its own right, just because it was unlike anything that had came before. It wasn't terribly frightening, but just the uniqueness of it made it interesting. And then Hollywood did what Hollywood tends to do. They just cashed that cow for all it was worth. And that really just wasn't a very good premise to start with. You know, you have something like Hellraiser, where I can understand why Hollywood said we have to make sequels of this because it's an incredibly frightening batch of imagery that they are trying to keep hold of. And while the movies became less and less scary because they were more and more rushed, for Dimension to keep the licensing, I could still understand that. But when it comes to Paranormal Activity, really it's just based on return on investment. It's pure numbers, and it shows that the people that are making these sequels aren't terribly interested in actually telling an interesting horror story, a unique horror story. Now, the Ghost Dimension has a few unique elements. It plays on this idea of the ghost camera, and I don't really mind that. It's an interesting take, but they don't really do much with it except the fact that the ghost camera finally sees the monster after 5 fucking films. Get your shit together, Paranormal Activity. But anyways, in terms of Paranormal Activity, the Ghost Dimension, that's pretty much the only interesting element. Everything else is just rehashed. Really, if you removed the CGI ghosty woo stuff and inserted just the usual Paranormal Activity scares of things that go bump in the night without you seeing what actually did the bumping, it would be the exact same movie. And that's one of the issues I had with the Paranormal Activity series in general, is it was just the exact same movie again and again, copy and paste, here you go. When you look at the first film, it was made for approximately $7,000, give or take. And then you look at some of these sequels that have never gained any more traction when it comes to scares, and they cost $5 million. I look at that and I say, well, they must have had amazing craft. They must have had amazing food on set. Because how else would this have cost $5 million? Maybe they had better actors, more union actors, more union crew, so that obviously increased the budget. But there should have been no reason why this budget ever exceeded $1 million, except for possibly with the Ghost Dimension, because they did have a lot of visual effects. So just even in terms of business, it always baffled me how this series progressed the way it did. But getting back to this idea of the unscary horror, there's this idea that if you can bring little Timmy in, why not have that version? It's kind of the same argument as making a PG-13 Deadpool, for those who are familiar with that franchise. When you look at the horror genre, it makes absolutely no sense to be okay with little Timmy seeing what's going to scare Timmy's dad or mom. It makes absolutely no sense. You have things like Scooby-Doo, or you know, for little girls, you have the Monster Brats or whatever the heck they're called. So you have these franchises that are based on child-appropriate horror. And that's fine. I can go see a movie with Scooby-Doo with my little niece and I will be entertained by it. That's fine. There's no reason why we need to actually say, okay, well, really like spooky Halloween stuff that it's supposed to be really super scary, we're going to max the scary that we can actually give little Timmy before he pees himself. Why cap yourself there? It baffles me, because, you know, you have horror fans that are very avid. Horror is one of those genres where it's kind of a love or hate thing. It's very rare that you find somebody who's like, yeah, I watch the occasional horror movie. It's either, fuck, I hate those things, or give me horror! There's no real in-between with horror, at least from what I've seen. You have people that are extremely passionate about it, or you have people that, sure, I'll watch it with Halloween, but that's about it. And they don't really like this idea of being scared. And that's fine. It's like comedy. I don't particularly enjoy comedy. I like to laugh, but it's not a genre I seek out. I'm not passionate about comedy. And so I understand that everyone has different passions. But when it comes to horror, you can't have it both ways. You can't have somebody that's like, give me the spooky, perfect Halloween movie and make it appropriate for little kids. Then they have Scooby-Doo. They have things like that. Make a child-appropriate, horror-themed film. That's fine. Do not make a film that portrays this idea of the spooky, the scary, the get under your skin style of thing, and then have it be watered down. It's, again, like having the Deadpool movie, which Marvel fought to have rated R on purpose. They refused to do it unless they had this R rating, because the Deadpool character, for those who are unfamiliar with the comic book character, is extremely violent, extremely sarcastic, extremely vulgar, and will pretty much, you know, do whatever he feels like. That's the type of character he is. He'll rip somebody's head off one day and then get almost killed and then try to woo Death, because Death is a female in the comic book. That happens in the comic book. It's that kind of twisted sort of world, and that's okay. That's appropriate for the Deadpool world. You can't have something that's meant to be gritty, transgressive, strange, in your face, and say, we're going to have it in your face, and then have this very limp, thrusted punch at audiences that are really wanting something deep in the gut. And that's what horror fans want. They want something that scares them. And when you have films like the Gallows and Paranormal Activity, the Ghost Dimension, or even the Paranormal Activity series in general, you have films that make it out to be this super scary type of punch to the gut. And they even have, you know, the marketing where you have the audiences in the Paranormal Activity series and they're like, oh my god! And then you actually watch the film and it's like, where's the scares? I refer to the Paranormal Activity series in general as the Where's Waldo of where am I supposed to be scared exactly here? Where's the actual scare? And they actually play the game much better than any of the Where's Waldo, because I honestly just feel no edge to these films. Now again, maybe that has its place. Maybe it should. Maybe they intended to be the Scooby-Doo of their generation, and that's perfectly fine. But to me, marketing it, showing adults just chewing on their nails at the edge of their seat and screaming and jumping, when you have horror fans that are used to every punch to the gut that filmmakers have been trying to pull since the dawn of film, because you have supernatural horror even at the very early years of cinema, you can't be this limp in your attack. And it's the same problem with the Gallows. I felt like the filmmakers didn't understand the long history that cinematic horror has. Paranormal Activity series, the same thing. And they really just felt like they're gonna get it, and then have this extremely lame, not scary attack. When you have to be, in order to scare people, you really have to be at least a little bit malicious as a filmmaker or a storyteller, and really go after the places where you know people are going to be afraid. You know people are going to be shocked and in awe and just blow their minds. That's the kind of horror, that's the kind of art in general that people are looking for. We don't want watered down things. And that's, I guess, a note to Hollywood. If anyone from Hollywood is watching this, hi, welcome to my channel. I'm surprised that you're here, but, you know, join a seat with the 14 other fans I have. And I will say this to you directly, Mr. Hollywood, Mr. or Mrs. Hollywood, please make films that have grit, that are willing to go out of their way to work hard, to really get underneath people's skins. And this is true not only of horror, this is true of drama, this is true of thriller, this is true of any genre you can think of. Art that I can leave behind thinking to myself, ooh, it's a good thing I didn't get hit too hard by this. That's fine for, you know, popcorn and Hollywood type films like Twilight or Die Hard or anything like that. And even now that I mentioned Die Hard even had a lot more depth than some of these films have in terms of their punch, their grit, and their willingness to go places that are unexpected and different. At least until the PG-13 fiasco that is the new Die Hard movies. Please just R-rate it. R-rated! It's called Die Hard! If you're taking your kid to a movie that's called Die Hard, then you shouldn't be like, little Timmy, don't worry, nothing really that bad is going to happen in a movie called Die Hard! You know what? I'm done. Mr. Hollywood, smarten up! I'm done! But don't forget to like or subscribe. If you want to see me talk about any other horror, leave a comment below. If you like this video, like. If you dislike it, feel free to hit the dislike button. I'm really just looking for any sort of interactivity. That's fine. If you have any critiques of these videos and my series in general, feel free to drop me a line. And if you really just love these things that I'm saying, please love me, then share this video. This is the Boogeyman signing out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and if you want to see more of specific things, just let me know in the comments below. This is the Boogeyman signing off, saying, don't be scared by anything. Not even me. Boo! Mimsy agrees, it's not very scary. Nuke my enemy in the face with a fat...